The biggest challenge when remaking a video game is figuring out how much of the original to preserve and how much to modernize, because fans of the original want both. They want the modernized version of the game while still keeping its feel, the essence of what made the game unique, intact. A visual uplift will always be expected as long as it respects the original art style. Gameplay is a finer line to walk. How much of what people remember fondly about the original is just nostalgia and would today only be seen as tedious? How much of that to preserve and how much to modernize to streamline the experience while still keeping the core of the game intact? The bigger the gap between original and remake, the bigger the technological leap between them, the more the question of preservation shifts away from gameplay to other elements. Not even the most hardcore nostalgic will look at this gameplay and say, yeah, that looks good. I mean, for its time it was good, obviously, but 30 years is a long ass time in the world of video games. Most of you watching this were probably not even born when the 7th Guest released back in 1993, so the question here is, what can be preserved aside from general setting and story? Vertigo Games' answer to that question is not much. Story and setting of their VR reimagining of this 30-year-old classic are at its core the same but have been expanded upon. Everything else was completely redone, not only to modernize but also to make it work in VR. And with that approach they managed to create one of the most intriguing VR puzzle games and maybe even their best work to this day. Hi, my name is Virtual Panic and this is the 7th Guest VR.
Old man Stauff built a house and filled it with his toys. 6 guests came one night. Their screams the only noise.
One fateful night, a long time ago, 6 guests were invited to Toymaker Stauff's ominous mansion. None of them ever to be seen again. What dark events transpired that night? What frightful fate befell the 6 guests? And who is the elusive 7th? It is your task to answer these questions and shine a light on the past by recreating the circumstances that accompanied the tragic events of that fateful night a long time ago in Toymaker Stauff's ominous mansion. In the 7th Guest VR you explore the dilapidated mansion of Henry Stauff, only armed with a lantern with the power to bring the past back to life. A past that tells the story of the 6 guests that were invited to the mansion only to be confronted with a set of puzzles. And a competition. Whoever of the guests manages to solve the final puzzle will be rewarded with whatever their hearts most desire. By solving the puzzles the guests were presented with yourself, you, room by room, return the mansion into its former state, and the story of that fateful night unfolds before you. It does not take long until the guests get competitive and in a very predictable fashion start killing each other, but what is it that Old Man Stauff really wants? In the intro I stated that Vertigo Games reworked pretty much every single aspect of the original game, and that is certainly true, but not without leaving a bunch of references and nods towards the 1993 classic. The biggest and honestly most impressive reference has to be the volumetric video. One of the distinguishing features of the original game was the use of live action video clips that were integrated into the pre-rendered 3D environments, as the game did not have free movement and all of the video clips played on static scenes. Putting a 2D video on top of that worked, but what to do when the player is supposed to be able to move around while these clips are playing? The most obvious solution would be to do what every video game does, to use 3D models and motion capture. But Vertigo felt that that would not do the original justice. So what they did instead was to create so-called volumetric video clips. These are created by having real actors play their scenes in a green room surrounded by a ring of 32 cameras, capturing the performance from every angle. This way you get a 3-dimensional video that they could integrate into the scenery and you, as a player, can move around and look at from every direction. That is a pretty cool technique in itself, but only in VR will it unfold its true potential. And while 3D models of human expressions have gotten pretty impressive lately, there's still a very noticeable difference to live actors. A major part of the story is told through these volumetric video clips. It mainly works so well because these are supposed to be ghostly apparitions, echoes from a past long gone, so if you get close they will simply vanish. It is truly impressive, at least on a technical side. They used amateur actors to play these roles and it's very obvious that they are amateurs. It's fine, it's not a big deal, they are doing their best.
Where's the dining room? Stop.
A premonition. Spirit dictates it's this way, mate.
If you say so, magic man.
The original was sold as a horror game. It would not be scary at all if played today, but back in the day players had to use more of their imagination. Maybe it was back then, I don't know. Vertigo decided to go a different route. The Seventh Guest VR has a clear mysterious vibe to it, and it can be a bit creepy at times, but never scary. Except if you have arachnophobia. Fair warning, some parts of the game could be difficult for you. Contrary to the original game, you explore a version of the mansion that is in a serious state of disrepair. It becomes obvious that you are the first soul to enter these halls since the fateful night you are trying to recreate. A helpful tool at your disposal is a lantern, which brings the past back to life. This is not only a cool visual trick, it is also used to uncover hints and needed for some puzzle solutions, as sometimes you have to recover an object that was lost or broken in time. Once you solved all the puzzles in a room, the whole room will be returned to its former state, thus returning the mansion part by part into the beautiful place it once was, giving the game a satisfying feel of progression. There's an all-new soundtrack. They have this slow jazz playing in the background, which gives a strong film noir vibe, very fitting.
Hamilton's a fool and Eleanor is a little lamb. But that snide Mr. Dunn,
He is a snake.
he's ruining everything. I wish he would just disappear.
I've talked a lot about visuals, presentation and atmosphere because these are the main distinguishing features of the game. In its core, The Seventh Guest is a very typical VR puzzle game. It's a good one, but one that by no means reinvents the wheel when it comes to gameplay and puzzle design. You have probably seen most of it or all of it before in some way or form, at least if you are into puzzle games. As you progress through the game, new parts of the mansion are unlocked. Every room has multiple puzzles for you to solve. Usually there's one main puzzle and a few what I call feeder puzzles that you have to solve first before you can tackle the main one. There are a lot more puzzles than there were in the original, which was a rather short game, and pretty much all of the puzzles are completely new, except maybe a few references. In the original there were a lot like form words and sentences from garbled letters or memorize and repeat a pattern. Here the approach to puzzle design is more mathematical, more logic based. Most puzzles are easy to execute when you have figured out the trick, the logic behind them, but figuring that out is the puzzle. That leads to these very typical situations where you rack your brain for a fair amount of time and suddenly it clicks and you'll be like, oh, that's so easy, why didn't I think of that sooner? It's quite satisfying. The only thing to do besides solving puzzles and watching 3D videos is to search for collectibles, and there's a bunch of them. So if you're an achievement/trophy hound, there's stuff for you to sink your claws in. One type of collectible, these coins, also have a purpose in game. They serve as a currency you can use to skip any puzzle in the game, which I think is a decent accessibility feature. Doing so will just lock you out of an achievement, at least for that playthrough.
It may be a game, but only Stealth knows the rules.
The Seventh Guest is a VR puzzle game. A very typical VR puzzle game, at least when it comes to gameplay. If puzzle games are not your thing, then this one will not change your mind. But for the rest of you, the game delivers. Its very solid puzzle design combined with its outright impressive presentation creates a pretty memorable experience. The most comparable game I could think of would be The Room: A Dark Matter, also a very solid VR puzzler. The Seventh Guest was created by Vertigo Games, who recently released a pretty well received Arizona Sunshine 2. Vertigo tend to be very ambitious when it comes to the scope of their games. A bit over ambitious maybe. At least for me, their games always fall a little short of my expectations. Arizona Sunshine 2 was just a bit too short for what I would have expected from a full price campaign shooter. After the Fall before that had a little too simple of an encounter design and too much copy pasta for boss fights. The Seventh Guest was quite a bit smaller in scale than their other projects. It's also quite a bit cheaper and thus creates a different set of expectations. And on these expectations the game delivers in its fullest. Because of that, for me, The Seventh Guest is Vertigo's best game so far. And they are currently working on a VR game in the Metro world, and ever since Exodus, Metro is a pretty big franchise, so that's also a rather ambitious project, and that's cool, keep being ambitious, but throwing in a smaller project like this from time to time suits you well. It's a good one, and for every friend of the occasional VR puzzler, I highly recommend it. Virtual Panic signing off, see you in the next one.